So I'm Harold Hubaum. I'm Associate Professor here at SOAS, University of London. I have around 15 years of experience in the climate policy and climate diplomacy space, and I'm the convener of our MSc in Global Energy and Climate Policy. And that degree is offered both as an on-campus degree and also as an entirely online based degree. I've only got one slide to share with you all, and that's just to give a bit of background on the degree that I run, that I work on with colleagues here. And in terms of my own work, I am also the Deputy Director of our Center for Sustainable Finance. So we're trying to bring together a lot of the policy dimensions and financing dimensions, because obviously, if we want to get on top of this global challenge of getting to net zero by the middle of the century and really addressing climate change effectively, we need to mobilize a lot of money. We all know that. Trillions of pounds or dollars every single year in the infrastructure that needs to be built out, needs to be shifted. And it's about not just mobilizing a lot of money into new things, renewables, low carbon technology, but also taking it away from the established industries and the entrenched sort of interests, the fossil fuel industry and those that are problematic from a climate perspective. Now, for us, when we started our work on this degree 10 years ago, and it was one of the very few degrees in this space internationally, it was as important then as it is now to look at this twin challenge of both the global climate crisis and the climate emergency. And today we speak of an emergency, which back then we didn't, but it's gotten to this point where time is really running out, as well as the global energy crisis, energy security, geopolitics. And as you'll be very much aware, today, this is very much on the agenda again, against the backdrop of Russia's war in Ukraine and what that has done. Not just to the people of Ukraine, but also, of course, to global energy markets, energy prices, and economies all around the world. So it's these twin challenges that we need to address, and that really color and shape policymaking, decision-making, diplomacy in the early 21st century. And what we do on the MSc is a three-pronged approach that's really explaining the name of that MSc. First, it's a global challenge. So it's called the Global Energy and Climate Policy degree. Climate change and also addressing energy effectively is quintessentially a collective action problem. We need to come together, the various different countries in the international system, but also the corporate world, the third sector, all actors on the various levels of human organization and across jurisdictions. That's very difficult to do. We've made some progress in the last few years, so it's not all doom and gloom, but that is the big challenge. And so what we do is we draw on cases from the international level, but we also look at case studies very much from the global south as much as the global north. So trying to understand not just what happens in the UK and in Europe, for example, but also what happens across Sub-Saharan Africa, in the Middle East and Asia. SOAS, University of London, is one of the leading institutions internationally for the study of those regions, Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. It's in her name. If we spell out SOAS, it's the School of Oriental and African Studies. We don't really want to say the word Oriental anymore, but that's why we shorten SOAS, University of London. But our expertise is particularly strong in those regions and in the politics, economics, cultural studies, etc., of those various different countries that we find across the global south. So taking a global approach to it. The second is that we look at energy and climate policy as an integrated challenge, that it's really indivisible. It's two sides of the same coin. If you want to address climate, you have to also look at energy. That's because more than 2/3 of our greenhouse gas emissions are tied up in the energy system and in our production and consumption of energy globally today. So addressing the climate emergency effectively requires a deep shift, a transformation, a transition in the energy system, but also economically and financially speaking. I often say to my students that the Paris Agreement is the world's biggest economic treaty you've never heard of, because we don't tend to think of the Paris Agreement as an economic agreement or an energy agreement, but in its in its implications for economies all around the world, that's exactly what it is. And I think it is very useful for us to think about it that way, because that elevates it to a much higher level than some people tend to think when they consider the Paris Agreement or climate as, oh, that's just an environmental issue. No, it's at the heart of everything, every single thing we do. And third, it's a policy challenge. And Ivan already pointed to that in an earlier presentation as well. Policy making, politics really is at the heart of this. We have for many years made the economic case, the technological case, and I think those cases are well supported and can be made very strongly so. The economics are right, the technological basis is there. What's now missing is the policy levers, is the political will to really see it through, to stand up and make a difference. And so removing that main blockage is part of what we're going to look at in our study of policy, looking into the black box of policy making and how can we shift, how can we make these changes rather than just deal with the outcomes of policy making. So it's those three things. It's global, it's energy and climate together, and it's policy. And then you arrive at the MSc in global energy and climate policy. The interdisciplinary nature is reflected in some of the courses that you can choose. I've given you a selection here. The core unit that I run on energy and climate policy, risk and policy analysis, is a skills-based module where we train you to write risk analysis and policy analysis the way it's done in risk advisories and in government. And you'll be working with representatives from government and from the private sector. Green finance, very similar. Of course, research methods, advocacy. There's a number of different elements in the economic, policy, legal space that are married together here for a more holistic approach to this study. And in terms of career paths, as for the other degrees too that have been presented here today already, there's too many to mention. There's loads of examples we can give. I've picked out a few examples. It is true that many of our students tend to work for international organizations and global companies and governments. Quite a few of them have ended up going to the World Bank, the Global Environment Facility, UNEP, the UK government, of course, consultancies, the Grantham Research Institute on Climate and Environmental Change, the IEA with its headquarters in Paris, and others. And there's also, of course, smaller companies and smaller players. But the opportunities, I think, across the degrees, this one as well as those presented by my colleagues, are very broad. There's a lot of application internationally for this because it's at the heart of our decision-making in so many different sectors. So I'll leave it at that. I look forward to hearing from you if you have further questions or if you'd like to come and join the work we do here at SOAS. I've given you my email at the bottom here, hh15@soas.ac.uk. Reach out with some questions that you might have. And thank you for the opportunity. And I'll hand it back to Maggie.